Zach here, and today I'm thrilled to welcome Brian Kramer, the GM of AccuTrade at Cars Commerce, which is a publicly traded company. And AccuTrade is revolutionizing the automotive space in advanced appraisal technology and data solutions that empower dealers and consumers alike. So, Brian, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today.
No, thanks for having me. I'm a big fan of the show.
So, Brian, you've held various leadership roles in the auto industry. Can you give the audience a little bit about your background and what led you to AccuTrade?
Yeah, so I spent 27 years in retail, held every position in a dealership. I ended up, for the last 19 years I was in retail, I ran dealerships, uh, multiple dealerships for the Germains, AutoNation, the Germains before that again. And at the end, ended up running a 600, now 700 car a month Toyota store in a little fishing village down here in Naples, Florida.
Wow.
What led me to AccuTrade is I started getting mentored by Robert Hollinshead, and he basically opened my eyes after a quarter century to a whole different way of looking at things and maximizing the wholesale exit as well as the retail exit. And for so much of my career, I'd only been focused on that. And what we were able to do in a very short period of time, once I finally figured out that unlock and looked at it in terms of what vehicles are really worth, not just what my perception of them was, and being able to identify a best end user strategy, um, did on a lot of different things that our team was able to accomplish at the Toyota Lincoln store down in Naples in the used car operation. So I ended up getting with Alex Vetter, Bob, and Alex asked me, he said, "Do you think that this is something that's scalable that could get unlocked for dealers across the country?" And I told him absolutely, and that's what we're helping dealers do now with AccuTrade.
Wow, that's an awesome story. And when you look at the used car market, especially since the pandemic, we've seen major shifts in recent years. What do you think are most significant changes in today's market?
So you can talk about EVs, you can talk about, but
Mhm.
EVs are just a new version of what hybrids were 20 years ago, or there's always going to be that high volatility vehicle. When gas prices in the Great Recession, hit $4 a gallon, and Hummers and Escalades and everything went through the same thing, that you see the same pattern, right? Where you have market day supply, 45-day look back of sales
Mhm.
versus forecasting. And then you've got, days on market or days on lot, days to sale, which is kind of a forward leading indicator. So what we're seeing now with EVs is if you have all the right data points, you can see the storm coming before it actually happens. But I wouldn't say that's the biggest major shift. Values have always been volatile in one segment or another. I think the biggest shift is what CarMax and Carvana are doing in terms of direct from consumer acquisition. And now a lot of these other big public aggregators are getting on board with that. And I think that what our goal is at AccuTrade and Cars Commerce is to be able to enable and empower every dealer to be able to operate at that scale, without the requirement of having 100 rooftops and having their own marketing company and their own AI engine to analyze the data, that we can arm the rebels against to compete.
So, AccuTrade is really known, I think, a lot in the market for its appraisal technology. How does it help dealers assess vehicle values in this kind of fluctuating market?
So we touched on it a minute ago with looking at forward leading indicators as well as lag measures. All of our competitors only provide a 45-day look back. And
Mhm.
that's great. It's half the equation, right? But it doesn't provide you where it's going. So if you have, for instance, I just saw it yesterday on a BMW 3 Series, four wheel, all wheel drive. That was a 2023. It had a 76 market day supply. So most dealers would be hesitant on that going into,
Yeah.
end of the year. But it had a 19 average days on market. So you can see where it's about to go. And something just changed, which is typically, you know, the no sale percentage just dropped. A bunch of people, probably there's a lot of sales at the auction. But conversely, if those numbers are flip flopped, if you got a 19 market day supply, people are going to overappraise those cars. And a 76 days on lot, it just means that there's a high no sale percentage and the bubble's going to pop at some point. We track average depreciation daily, monthly,
Mhm.
and internally we don't share it, but we track no sale percentage because we think that what didn't sell is just as, if not more important than what did sell, which is why. And I don't think that even our competitors would disagree that we have the most accurate appraisal values in the industry.
So digital tools, they're definitely critical in the used car industry. And one of the ways I think AccuTrade kind of stands out from other solutions is it has a component where just like if you go to cars.com or Carvana and enter a license plate or enter a VIN, you get an instant trade appraisal. And it gives that almost like omni-channel, like digital retail, transparent like feel. Like, what are your thoughts on how AccuTrade kind of stands out from the competition?
Well, so many people cringe when you say omni-channel, um,
Yeah.
but I think it's because they weren't really doing business in an omni-channel way, and they were saying it, calling it omni-channel, but then still having a lead form at the end, and not really being able to keep going. So, yes, so we break down license plate, VIN number, or year, make, model, depending on whatever the consumer wants. Because I think that's a very important element is that a lot of dealers will put their own, I used to do it, put your own biases and your own beliefs into how the consumer, you think the consumer wants to buy rather than giving them the choice to self-guide their journey. And there's a lot of dealers that will, for instance, only provide a range because they don't believe in the guaranteed values, or the range is and we see this all the time with our competitors. The range will be 28,000 to 32,000, a really high number, but then the guaranteed offer is 19,000 from the same provider. So that causes friction. It causes lack of trust, digital trust between the consumer. We think it should be one number, and it should be a competitive number. We're more competitive than our competitors 59% of the time, according to some Wall Street analysts. That measure us on a regular basis. So I would say that our values are the most accurate because I think it's like the Goldilocks zone. The values have to be just right. They can't be too low. They can't
Hmm.
be too high because then you won't get the appointments. Customer doesn't come in, or worse case, they come in and then you're not able to honor the number. So we want to make sure that's exact. We decode more digits of the VIN than any other competitor. And that's getting better every day. But I would say that when it comes to mileage, bad Carfaxes, niche cars, every other competitor will only guarantee a number on a vehicle 78% of the time. We guarantee 98.5% of our appraisals. So that means even up to the $850,000 Ford GT that we bought recently, or a Lamborghini
Wow.
Reventon, or you name the oddball 2024 Lucid, or how about Fisker Oceans on the way down? Nobody would guarantee those things except for us. So when we're like the Navy SEALs, when nobody else wants to hang the number on the car, and somebody needs to get it, and even a lot of those, a lot of the other big aggregators call us for a second opinion when they're trying to get a guaranteed number because it's easy to appraise the 75% or 78%. It's really hard to praise that last 20%.
Very true. And what are some of the common misconceptions you see around vehicle appraisals, valuations, especially if dealers aren't using products like AccuTrade or in some cases Viato, like a used car dealer?
Yeah, and I used Viato up until the day I left retail, and I'm a huge fan of it and a huge fan of Dale's. But that technology, came out in when BDCs were coming out, and in 2005, that was like the iPhone. The iPhone hadn't even come out yet, and so there's some certain limitations that obviously a lot of the other competitors and AccuTrade have figured out in the meantime. One of the biggest misconceptions that I think, not the biggest, is what's the impact to a vehicle's value with a bad Carfax indicator, VHR? What about high miles versus low miles? The impact of color, or as Bob Holland says, those are each one's a strike, but when you get three strikes, you're basically out. And there's a compound
Hmm.
effect when you have a bad Carfax plus a bad color plus bad mileage. And when you loop those three together, it's one thing if you have one of those, but you have two, it makes it a lot more difficult from an SRP VDP standpoint. If you have a bad VHR, you're going to get about half the SRPs as you would on a good VHR vehicle. So you have to take your price into consideration in order to drive the SRP or search results pages up. So I don't think that dealers take that into consideration, and there's not an automated way on the most difficult vehicles, especially luxury cars, exotics, to be able to
Okay.
account for a McLaren that's a 2-year-old McLaren with a bad Carfax that's been in a front end collision without airbag deployment, that's bright blue, with 48,000 miles on it. That's one of those things that sometimes takes days for a dealer to appraise, or even I'll give you the best example. Ford F-150. Looked at two Ford F-150s recently. One's burgundy, one's white. The white one has four-wheel drive. It's got a panel roof. It's got boards. It's got a tonneau cover. It's got leather, power seats, and navigation. The burgundy one has none of that. But the average MMR auction value on it, on each, both of them is the same because the VIN decodes the same way.
Hmm.
With us, so if you're on that particular vehicle, it's like a 2023, I think, with 20,000 miles on each one of them. The burgundy one that has less equipment, doesn't have all the options, we appraised it, I think, at 38,000. Average MMR is 43. The white one was 47,000 with us. That's one of those situations where a dealer will go, oh, CarMax, Carvana, they're putting crazy money in the car. And they're not putting crazy money in the car. They know what that car will retail for, and they have more data available to them in the competitive sets. And I think that's what dealers don't realize is unless you have software like AccuTrade, you're at a distinct disadvantage against those two companies, not
Hmm.
to mention some of the other big ones. And it's mission critical that you don't overappraise the burgundy one because most dealers just say, I took it in $1,000 less of MMR, which is still thousands too much. But the bigger missed opportunity is not appraising the white one for the right money. And then it goes through the auction and nobody realizes why it's going through for that much money. And it's because they can only decode the VIN to a certain extent. So they don't know. So the deal with AccuTrade can acquire more aggressively or what they perceive as more aggressively because they already know what the exit is. So it is a distinct advantage.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And I remember once Bob told me if you're not using a tool like AccuTrade to do vehicle appraisals, it's theft by ignorance. And
Oh my
I
God, that's
think that
beautiful.
might resonate with a lot of people listening. So, customer experience is becoming key for dealers. We see players like Carvana, for instance, in the marketplace. How does AccuTrade's tools enhance the appraisal and buying process? And we've talked a little bit about dealers, but on like the consumer side, the consumer experience.
Well, to your point, Carvana's really figured it out. And obviously their acquisitions, they and CarMax are acquiring 85% plus of their inventory directly from consumers. Now, Carvana, when they were acquiring 12%, they were buying all those cars at the auction, or CarMax was. Everybody was, how are they doing? They weren't anywhere near as profitable. Now that they're,
Mm.
in the 80s, they're wildly profitable. And I think that that's the goal. That should be the goal for every franchise dealer. Now, how do you do that? You have to focus on the customer experience and work backwards. And you cannot use the trade appraisal process as a lead aggregation form. And we ask a few questions and then here, fill out your information, somebody will be in touch with you. You have to let the consumer guide the journey. They need to be able to adjust the miles up and down. It needs to be a self-service SaaS model that's very simple with it. And we just added an enhancement on the cars.com website because we're just relentlessly pursuing how can we eliminate one more click and still guarantee the offer and still be just as competitive because we want to get it down to where in our cars.com my garage that's live on the site now, the client, we already know the client's name, we already know the client's number, we already know their email address, we already know everything about them. We've already got it's got like a Carvana value tracker where you can get
Hmm.
updated on the values. But we believe that's the future of lead generation. First thing. Second thing is we're going to be integrating the ability for them to pull their own payoffs in a self-service manner. Most, if you take a look at every dealer's website, what's their closing ratio during store hours versus off hours? It's like
Yeah.
3x. So if you're not allowing the customer to go full journey, a lot of websites we see an 80% plus bounce rate on the GA4 events. If you don't
Yep.
allow the customer, it's fine to give them a range, but if they want to keep going and actually get a guaranteed value, if you don't give them that option, there's an 80% bounce and they go to a Carvana or CarMax or something like that. So I think that even where the landing page is at the end of the journey, they should drop into the SRP page of the dealership's inventory because CarMax Carvana don't advertise the consumer, buying a car. They just advertise them selling them their car. And that's what the traffic generator is. And if dealers aren't maximizing that, that's the price of admission these days in order to get them to view your inventory.
Mm. And do you have a success story that might resonate with like a single store used car dealership that effectively used AccuTrade's online or in-store trade appraisals? So you talked a little bit about like higher volume dealers. What about like smaller kind of mid-volume dealer really being affected with AccuTrade?
Yeah, I've got two examples. One of them is a dealer in Sarasota called Ho Ho Buys Cars, Howard Horowitz,
Hmm.
and he is he's buying 30 to 50 cars a month. It's just him and his lot porter. He takes the leads. I've actually had some big groups complain about him and saying he's got a bunch of people and they must be manipulating the system. And I'll tell you the secret to his success. And his closing ratio is like 20% on the inbound leads, which is unheard of from acquisition standpoint. If you
Yeah.
call his number on his website, he'll pick up the phone in one ring every single time. And if you're within an hour of him, he's going to come out to you to appraise your vehicle and buy it from you. And
Hmm.
everything he advertises is it's going to be the easiest experience. And they could go buy, from obviously there's a ton of dealers in Sarasota, Tampa area. But he says his value prop is not that he's going to beat CarMax by $500. It's that it's going to be the easiest, effortless car selling experience you've ever had. and
Great.
and he has repeats, referrals, and and he was buying all of his cars at the auction, a few $100. Now, obviously, his margins are a completely different story. But I mean, I could go on for days. But George Saliba, which everybody can follow, George Saliba, his last name's Saliba,
On
up in New
TikTok,
Jersey.
right?
JNS, yeah, on TikTok. I won't say the number, but it's in the four-digit number of how many inbound leads he gets through social media, his website, all through the AccuTrade portal. And as he's told me, he said, I manage all my prospects through the inbound. We've got it's similar to a CRM where you can see all the leads coming in and if they've been adjusted or not. But he also and you can text the offers, you can send condition reports right from within the tool. But what he's I mean, you've obviously seen his videos and how interesting that is. But if you think about $30 a lead, what he's able to do, he a obviously he's a great marketer, but he wouldn't be able to
Mhm.
handle all those unless he hired another 10 or 20 headcount in order to process all these guaranteed offers because he's doing what CarMax and Carvana are doing. He's letting the system appraise 80% of his cars. And he's doing exotics and all kinds of crazy stuff, but he's only getting involved on the 20%. The system takes care of the other 80%. So it really allows you to scale in a big way if you're short staffed and a smaller, like especially an independent.
Yeah, those are two just awesome examples. And as we look to like 2025, what are some exciting things coming down the pipeline from AccuTrade standpoint?
Well, probably the most exciting is something that we've been working on for it'll be 3 years here in March, is what we call IIP. It's Inventory Intelligence Platform. So I think that everybody would agree that AccuTrade is the most powerful vehicle acquisition platform from a decentralized way for sight unseen appraisals, websites, um, inbound buy centers, service drive acquisition. So but we haven't had the other half of the piece, which is syndication, pricing,
Mm.
AI based recommendations, so that everybody for the most part, I think knows what to do. But the amount of time it takes you to identify, so why is this car not selling? Why are the VDPs so low and the SRPs are high, or vice versa? Our system will tell you that. It'll say this, you're missing these three key options. Please add these to your merchandising text. AI based comment generators that are unique to whichever, to different search engines. But I think that not having to go search and identify and taking 10 minutes or 20 minutes a car to figure out as a used car manager why they're not selling when you get the bullets flying and you got inbound calls coming in and you're doing everything as a used car manager, right? Approving recon. We want to take as much of that off the operator's plate as possible and automate it with AI. So it will just serve up, this is the issue with this car. Check the photos. There's issues with the photos. Whatever the issues are, identifying within the inventory, if you were able to eliminate these vehicles that have over a market day supply of 70, it would increase your PVR by this. Wholesaling these units today would increase your PVR from this to this, and also reduce your average days to sale by 17 days. And it'll break down your holding costs, all of that stuff. So it's going to be really transformational. Nothing like that's been in automotive, nothing close yet.
Wow, that's pretty exciting. Last question. What advice would you give to a single store used car dealership is they're thinking about navigating the evolving digital and appraisal landscape?
That's a great question. So obviously I'm biased, but if I left Cars Commerce today and I opened up an independent store,
Mhm.
I think all of our biggest independent dealers would agree with me that they wouldn't be able to do business without AccuTrade. And that's obviously a, self-serving comment, but I think that every dealer needs to be kind of like with the Oakland A's and Billy Beane and Moneyball. And they said anybody who's not thinking about this model is out of their mind and they'll be a dinosaur in 5 years, Boston Red Sox owner. I look at this in the same way. If you're not looking at CarMax and Carvana and what they're doing and how they're impacting the industry and not trying to figure out that formula and not partnering with somebody like us that can automate not just the values, that's becoming the price of admission because if you don't do that, they'll
Mhm.
just jump to those two websites and they will. And then you're going to lose the trade. So gathering those trades and switching the perception from look to book and wanting to be at 50% look to book to I want to be at 50% trade win capture, which is if you sell 100 cars, I'm taking in 50 trades. Because a lot of people will sell 100 cars and they'll take in 20 trades and they don't really think
Mhm.
about it because the national average is 26. So focusing on that on a daily basis and focusing not just on your daily sales rate, but on your daily acquisition rate. How many cars did I acquire from consumers today? And just constantly having that and rethinking BDCs, BDCs to handle inbound phone calls. There should be something dedicated like that for acquisition teams where you have a team that actually just handles this from cradle to grave. You're able to cut same day checks. It's the most volatile and the most rewarding part of the business. New cars, you're at the mercy of whatever's being built and whatever the market conditions are,
Mhm.
lease programs, OEM incentives. Service is going to continue until 2030 to grow at a pretty healthy rate. Same thing with parts and collision. But used cars is what I'm seeing. I talked to three dealers this morning, and the difference between the three dealers I talked to that are winning that had record months last month, and a bunch of the other dealers I talked to that talk about external market conditions and how tough it is and how the auctions have lost their minds and you can't make any money on cars. And then the same dealers in the same market are enjoying record months. It always comes down to used cars and their sourcing strategy. And the ones that are winning are sourcing them from consumers, and the ones that are struggling are buying them at the auction.
Yeah, that's such thoughtful advice, I think, for used car dealers listening to this podcast. And I love the Moneyball reference. I actually threw out the opening pitch for the Oakland A's last year. So I got to go
Oh,
to the
that's cool.
stadium and everything where they shot Moneyball. So, Brian, it's just been awesome having you on the podcast. You're so insightful. I just appreciate your time today, and so does the audience.
No, thank you for having me, Zach. I appreciate it.